developing episodes of depression. Yes, women are more likely to be affected by depression than men. However, 1 in 8 adolescents may suffer from depression. So it's not just the adult population, but it's also children and the adolescent will also experience depression overall. When you talk about depression, what exactly are we referring to other than the sadness? So when we are diagnosing persons with illnesses, we use this book called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. And this gives us guidelines of what the symptoms are of these mental illnesses. And these symptoms will vary from person to person. But when we talk about symptoms specifically for depression, those symptoms will include the loss of interest in things, as well as the low mood for 2 or more weeks. There are other symptoms of depression that are a part of it. There is the changes in appetite. So a person may have eating all the time, or the person may have no appetite at all. There's also changes in sleep where the person will sleep all the time, or the person will have insomnia where they can't sleep at all. The psychomotor changes, whether the person is lethargic, decrease in energy, thinking and concentration issues, also thinking about themselves as being worthless and maybe even have extreme guilt. And severe persons that are in depression will experience thoughts of wanting to end their life, or suicidal thoughts, and even sometimes attempt. Other signs that we may see in persons that are experiencing depression is feeling empty. Some persons will say, I have no feeling, I'm just completely empty, sometimes even numb. Loss of self-esteem, lack of sometimes just complete lack of control, and just unexplainable crying spells, some irritability, a lot of self-blame, a lot of negative kind of thought patterns, loss of feelings of warmness towards family members or friends, and even body kind of responses, which includes pains in the body, headaches, digestive issues. All of this is part of the depressive symptoms, because sometimes people come in and see their general practitioner and say, you know, I have these aches and these pains. And sometimes the aches and pains are not physical related, but sometimes mentally related. And so if you're experiencing any kind of physical pain or any type of issues along all of these symptoms, make sure that you seek some help so that they can be treated and identified what the issues may be.
Good.
So Troy, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And folks, at the end of our presentation, you're allowed to chime in, ask questions, and if any clarification that is needed, we will be more than happy to clarify. And if there are answers that we cannot give, we'll just have to get back to you. Today, we're going to talk about grief and loss, managing grief and loss. Grief is the response to loss, particularly to the loss of someone or something that has died, to which a bond or affection was formed. Although conventionally focused on the emotional response to loss, it also has physical, cognitive, behavioral, social, spiritual, and philosophical dimensions. Thank you. Tracy, I need you to move because I don't have access to moving it. Good. Now you're going back. Okay, 5 stages. You know what? Can you go back, please?
One more?
Yes, I haven't gone on yet.
This is just keep telling me to.
Okay, you know what? Let me share.
No, I got it. It was just acting up briefly. So go ahead.
Okay, good. So basically, as we are aware, the global coronavirus pandemic has created a new reality marked by grief and loss. And so we're going to be talking about the connection between COVID-19 and grief and loss. And I will share with you some of the definition of, basically one of the definition of grief and loss. Next slide. Well, we'll talk about 5 stages of grief. And in some research, you might see 7, but I'm dealing with Kubler-Ross stages of grief, where there's denial, there's anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now, you can hit any of these stages at any time. These stages are not linear, meaning it doesn't go in process to denial to anger to bargaining. You can go to denial and then you could go to depression and you could jump back to anger. It all determines, and I will explain later on in the presentation. Good. Denial is one of the first 5 stages of grief. In this stage, the world becomes meaningless and overwhelmed. Life makes no sense. We are in a state of shock and denial. We go numb. We wonder how we can go on, if we can go on, and why should we go on. We try to find a way to simply get through each day. And that's what grief does. Denial helps us to cope with the pace of life. Denial helps us to pace our feelings of grief. There's grace in denial. It's nature's way of letting us, or letting in only as much as we can handle. As you accept reality of the loss and start to ask yourself questions, you are unknowingly beginning the healing process. All the feelings you were denying will begin to surface after you leave this stage. Next. Our second stage is anger. Anger is a necessary stage of the healing process. Be willing to feel your anger, even though it may seem endless. The more you truly feel it, the more it will begin to dissipate and the more you will heal. There are many other emotions under the anger, and you will get to them in time. But anger is the emotion we are most used to managing. The truth is that anger has no limits. It can extend not only to your friends, the doctors, your families, yourself, and your loved ones. You may ask, where is God in all of this? Underneath anger is pain, your pain. It is really natural, folks, to feel deserted and abandoned, but we live in a society that fears anger. Anger is strength, and it can be an anchor, giving temporary structure to nothingness of loss. At first, grief feels like being lost at sea, no connection to anything. Then you get angry at someone, maybe a person who didn't attend the funeral, maybe a person who isn't around, maybe a person who's different now that your loved one has died. Suddenly, you have a structure. Your anger towards them. The anger becomes a bridge over the open sea. And as you see, I have my background of this nice, calm sea, Caribbean breeze. Suddenly you have structure, like I stated, your anger towards them. The anger becomes a bridge over the sea and a connection from you to them. It is something to hold on to, and a connection made from the strength of anger feels better than nothing. We usually know more about suppressing anger, and people always say to you, suppress that anger. Let it go, let it get away. But we always say, in grief, you don't need to suppress the anger. The anger is just another indication of intensely how you would have loved that person. Even in some other coping mechanism, we try to tell you to channel that anger. People say, let's blow off steam, but we say, channel that anger into something positive, something creative. Next slide. The other stage is bargaining. And bargaining, basically before a loss, it seems like you will do anything. If only your loved one would be spared, you'll ask questions like, please God, I will never be angry at my wife or my husband again if you would just let them live. After a loss, bargaining may take the form of temporary truce. If I devote the rest of my life to helping others, then can I wake up and realize this is all a bad dream? We become lost in a maze of only, if only, or if just only, Lord. Statements like that normally come about. We want life returned to what it was. And as you can experience in the COVID-19, we want our loved ones restored. We want to go back in time, find the tumor sooner. The doctors only could have found the tumor sooner if PMH had better medication, if we would only had referral to doctors away, if only it caused us to find fault in ourselves and what we think we could have done differently. We might even bargain with the pain. We will do anything not to feel the pain of this loss. We remain in the past trying to negotiate our way out of the hurt. People often think of the stages as lasting weeks or months. They forget that the stages are responses to our feelings that can last for minutes in some cases. Even in other cases, it can last for hours as we flip in and out of one of the stages. We do not enter or leave each individual stage in a linear fashion, like I stated before. We may feel one, then on another occasion, back again to the first one. And that is how anger goes. Next stage is depression. And I know Dr. King would have talked about depression from the mental health or the mental illness aspect. This one of depression is not a mental illness concept. After bargaining, our attention moves squarely into the presence. Empty feelings present themselves and grief enters our lives on a deeper level, deeper than we ever imagined. The depressive stage feels as though it will last forever. It's important, very, very important to understand that this depression is not a sign of mental illness. It is the appropriate response to a great loss. We withdraw from life, left in a fog of intense sadness, wondering perhaps if there is any point in going on alone. Why go on at all? Depression after a loss is too often seen as unnatural, a state to be fixed, something to snap out of. People say, why don't you just get out of it? You've been in this state for long. Your wife has died 3 months ago. You should have been over it. The first question to ask yourself is whether or not the situation you are in is actually depressing. The loss of a loved one is a very depressing situation, and depression is a normal and appropriate response. To not experience depression after a loved one dies would be unnatural. When a loss fully settles in your soul, the realization that your loved one didn't get better this time and is not coming back is understandably depressing. If grief is a process of healing, the depression is one of the many necessary steps along the way. It's a natural, very natural response to a loss of a loved one. The final of the 5 stages is acceptance. Acceptance basically is almost or often confused with the notion of being all right or okay with what has happened. This is not the case. Most people don't ever feel okay or all right about the loss of a loved one. I know if you ever had a loss of a child or wife, spouse, or very dear friend or relative, you know, it's never okay to experience that loss. This stage is about accepting the reality that our loved one is physically gone and recognizing that this new reality is the permanent reality we will never like this reality or make it okay. But eventually, we accept it. When learn to live, we learn to live, you know. We really learn to live with it. It is the new norm when somebody dies, your mother, a parent, it becomes a new norm with which we must learn to live. We must try to live now in a world where our loved one is missing. In resisting this new norm at first, many people want to maintain life as it was before. And they say, you know, if Susan wouldn't want you to be in this state, she would want you to move on. But in our current condition, a lot of times people don't understand that this is a process that we must go through. It's a new norm when somebody has gone on or they lost to death or they lost to an accident. It was before a loved one died. In time, though, bits and pieces of acceptance. However, we see that we cannot maintain the past intact. It has been forever changed and we must adjust or readjust. We must learn to recognize roles, reassign them to others, or take them on ourselves. Finding acceptance may be just having more good days than bad ones. As we begin to live again and enjoy our life, we often feel that in doing so, we are betraying our loved ones. You know, for love or for a loss of a spouse, sometimes persons do not move on because they feel guilty if they move on. That spouse would think that they have been cheating on them. And that isn't necessarily true. At least I hope it isn't. We can never replace what has been lost, but we can make new connections, new meaningful relationships, new interdependencies. Instead of denying our feelings, we listen to our needs, we move, we change, we grow, we evolve. We may start to reach out to others and become involved in their lives. We invest in our friendships and in our relationships with ourselves. We begin to live again, but we cannot do so until we have given grief its time. So remember, it takes time. Next slide. You know, grief and COVID-19, the global coronavirus pandemic has created a new reality marked by grief and loss. Weddings, concerts, meetings, travel plans, school events, more have been canceled in the wake of this virus. And I know some persons ask, why should we cancel? Why can't we just go on? The other day, you would have watched here locally in the Bahamas, there was just big celebration at a funeral where there was only supposed to be 10 or less persons. But this has become our new normal. People can't adjust or they're not willing to adjust. Next. It has forced us to process both individual and collective grief in face of uncertain future, which we are powerless to control. Any type of loss can trigger grief. And so that's why we always say to you, make your emotional health your priority, especially in COVID-19. You can have a job loss, that brings on financial anxiety. And then there's loss of safety because you cannot pay for things. You worry about loved ones, how you're gonna take care of your grandmother, how you're gonna take care of your aunt. And then there's a new thing that has come on stream, social distancing. We as human beings, we are social creatures. We like that bonding. We like that hugs, that handshakes. But now we have the social distancing, quarantine. And when we start to quarantine, if there's an illness or such, then we start to feel the feelings of isolation. And also changes in our daily habits. I get up every Saturday morning, gotta do 10,000 steps, 5,000 steps, 3 miles, 5 miles. We cannot do that on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning no more because there's a lockdown. And so that can trigger grief. Also, we don't know when we're gonna come out of this pandemic. And because we don't know when we're gonna come out, some of us have taken on the fears of the future. How do we plan? How do we plan for our child school education? How do we plan for our education? How do we plan for anything in the future if we don't know if next week, if job is gonna be back, or if the banks are gonna be open, or if we're gonna be on a 2 weeks lockdown, and especially with a lot of fake news going on, there's fears of the future. And then also worries about payment of rent, utilities, and other bills. And what I try to tell to my client, especially about worries, we say, how much control do you have over this worry about payment of rent? How much control do you have over worries of paying for your mortgage? And we ask them in a percentage of how much control. Let's say they tell us 80%, and they have 80% control. And we ask them, with that 80%, are you doing all that you possibly can with that 80%? And if they say yes, then we ask the question, why worry? They might want to explain. We say, I don't need you to explain. Just leave it because, it is about cognitive dissonance. There's mixed feelings, this clashing feelings about how one feels and what one has to do and everything else. Signs of grief in COVID-19, coping with grief and loss. Grief affects every part of us, our thoughts, our feelings, body, spirit, and relationships. Sometimes we don't know how to manage its impact. So some signs that you may be coping with grief considering this pandemic include trouble focusing on normal tasks, the routine tasks that you would have had at work or the routine tasks that you might have had at home. Sometimes you're facing or you're having some form of trouble focusing on them. Some of us, we're sleeping too much. Instead of getting out 8 to 9 hours, we sleep in 12, 13 hours. Some of us binging on Netflix, or we sleeping too short. And then there's feelings of anger and irritability, headaches, upset stomach, because we just don't know, fatigue or low energy. And that's why it's very important to exercise. That's why it's very important to take your vitamins. And then you're re-experiencing feelings of past grief. Engaging in activities such as eating, drinking, or online shopping to cope with anxiety. And what I shared on WhatsApp the other day, I said, boy, when I come out of this COVID-19, I'm gonna have to really go on a serious diet because I'm cooking 3 meals a day sometimes, and then I'm eating dinner at 5, 6 o'clock, and then through the night when I'm watching Netflix, I get up to eat a bowl of cereal, and then later on, an hour later, I'm still up, I'm eating cookies. We have to avoid thinking or talking about the pandemic, because every time you turn on the news channels, CNN, NBS, MSNBC, Our News, ZNS, there is so much about COVID-19, and then we have friends and families just sending updates. Oh, there's 50, there's 60, there's 70 persons who have contracted this virus. And so sometimes you have to pull yourself away. Ways to cope, ways you can cope. No matter what type of loss you have experienced, it is important to remember that your feelings are valid and that you are not alone in this. Tips to coping: practice self-care. And when I talk about practice self-care, what I've done personally, every morning I get up, I'm going to shave my head, I'm going to shave my face. I want to do that as a normal routine. If I go to exercise, I'm going to keep that as practice. If I'm on lockdown, I'm going to still get up, take a nice shower, lotion down, put on cologne. And so you want to practice self-care. Always keep your environment in the way that you normally would have kept it. Next, give yourself time. Give yourself time. Remember that your feelings are valid. Reach out to family and friends. Yes, curfew say you cannot visit friends and families, but you can reach out on Skype, you can reach out on WhatsApp, telephone call. Reach out with family and friends. Find support. If you're feeling really overwhelmed, get professional help. And at the end of the slide, we'll show you some support materials that you can actually link onto. Explore coping techniques. And earlier, I would have shared some of the things that you could do: exercising, listen to inspirational music, inspirational teachings. You can do that as well. Explore your coping techniques and check in with others. It's one thing to have social distancing, and it's another thing to have social isolation. You might be quarantined by yourself, but you don't have to be isolated. So check in with others. Always make that consistent check-in with them. Grief is a normal response to loss, but COVID-19 pandemic has upended many aspects of the normal grieving process. Whether you are coping with a job loss, financial instability, loneliness, or a general sense of anxiety about coronavirus, the emotional upheaval caused by COVID-19 may trigger feelings of grief and loss. How you cope depends on a wide variety of factors, including your overall resilience and social support system. And social support system is very important. A lot of us have WhatsApp groups, we have email groups, we have family groups. Try to get to those support system that gives you the positive benefit, not those which gonna share with you the sad realities of what's happening, but those what gives you, looking at the glass half full instead of half empty. Give yourself permission to mourn and treat yourself and others with kindness during this difficult time. That's very important. You have to love up in yourself. Whether you can't go to dinner no more, well, treat yourself. Like I have a colleague in one of my groups. She loved cakes, and she knows she ain't supposed to be eating cake, but she treats herself every so often to sweets. Next. Good. That's you.
So, as we were talking about this series and focusing on important mental health issues, depression and grief was important because we recognize that the COVID-19 situation leads to social isolation, and social isolation for some people can be very difficult. can bring feelings of loneliness and sadness. We also recognize that the COVID-19 situation has led to us having to experience loss, whether losses of a loved one, loss of our lifestyle, loss of a job, financial security, all of these aspects. And when we are talking about grief and loss, one thing we didn't want to miss was talking about suicide prevention. Because one of the symptoms of depression is persons thinking about wanting to end their life. And so we wanted to take this opportunity just to kind of share some information about suicide and ways to prevent it. Because in this country, over the last several years, we're seeing more and more persons. And if I remember correctly, there was a report recently of someone, and I don't know if it was confirmed, but someone hanging themselves. And we really need to focus on taking care of ourselves, but also being our brothers and sister keepers, and recognizing that we may not be experiencing some of these symptoms, but they may. So with suicide, suicide is a significant issue. Some people may think about it, oh, in Nassau, you know, we only have, it is a very serious, and it's a global mental health, global public health issue. When you have close to 1 million people die per year of suicide. And the statistic out there talk about having one suicide every 40 seconds. And that is significant in itself. But what is even more is the fact that for every one completed suicide, there are 25 suicidal attempts. So those are persons that we may not know of that may be experiencing suicidal thoughts and attempts that we have no aspect of reaching or getting them help because they haven't identified themselves. Yes, women do attempt suicide more often, according to the statistics, but men actually complete suicide more often than women. So women and men are both at risk. Not only gender-wise, when we talk about age, suicide does not discriminate at all. Children, adolescent, young adults, older adults are all susceptible to feelings of wanting to end their life. And suicide does not just only impact the individual, but the individuals around them, their loved ones, their family, their co-workers. And according to the statistic that was presented last year, about 135 people are affected by each suicide death. So that is a lot. Significant amount of persons are being affected. And I really am passionate about this because I work in the mental health field and I see persons get to this point, whether the person is depressed or whether someone is grieving. But the one thing that I want to highlight is that suicide does not mean that the person has a mental illness. There are persons that have suicidal thoughts that have not been diagnosed with a mental illness. And that is something that we have learned recently in the last several years based on the CDC report that came out a couple of years ago. Because a lot of persons thought that suicide was something just only for mental illness, mentally ill people, but that is incorrect. There are a whole list of risk factors that that is part of suicidal behaviors and thoughts. For example, someone who's in chronic pain or has a progressive illness may get to the point of wanting to end their life. Someone who has had a significant loss, as we were talking about with grief, may get to the point of wanting to end their life. Someone with a mental illness has increased susceptibility to suicidal thoughts and behaviors. But also persons that may have had family members that may have ended a history of trauma. All of these are risk signs, increased risk signs for them. And then we have the warning signs. The warning signs, and when I talk about this, I say that it's not just one sign. It's a combination of these signs that will increase a person's likelihood to end their life. We talked about the negative view of life, whether they're themselves, whether their future, but just the glass is half empty about everything in their life, a feeling of hopelessness about their future, about their situation, sometimes even feeling trapped. In this day and age and dealing with the COVID-19, and we're talking about social distancing, and we always highlight what is social distancing versus social isolation. You can socially distance, but not socially isolate, because social isolating is actually a harm to your mental health. So social distancing just means being separate from other people physically, but you can always be connected to people through various aspects, as Troy had mentioned, with Skype and WhatsApp, and even what we're doing now with Zoom. I know there are tons of people out there doing like movie nights and live movie nights on Facebook and different aspects to stay connected with people. So social distancing does not mean social isolation, because isolation will increase the likelihood of feeling depressed and also impact your mental health in a negative way. You have other warning signs such as increase in substance use or risky behavior, feeling like a burden to others, real drastic mood behavior changes, giving away sometimes prized possessions, which is a sense of preparation for their death because they have made a decision to end their life, and doing the funeral arrangements. You'll also see increase in self-harm or cutting behaviors, making suicidal threats. People will say to me, well, I have people come and say, well, I had a bad day, I just want to kill myself. And I tell people, if you had a bad day, would you automatically go to that? That means that there's something else happening with that individual who makes that statement. So if someone is saying to you, I want to end my life, you need to take it seriously, or you need to pay more closer attention to that individual. But it was always good to mention that even though you have the statistics that can be very daunting and very depressing at times, there is the positive light where suicide is preventable. You want to always treat any type of suicidal statement, person expressing feelings about suicide seriously, even if they do it in a jokingly manner. Sometimes it may also help just to ask them directly, are you thinking about wanting to end your life? Or are you thinking about harming yourself? A lot of people will say, well, I don't feel comfortable asking that question, but asking that question can actually be one of the most helpful things that you can do, because it allows a person to feel less isolated. It also allows them to share what may be happening, and it gives you the opportunity to help that individual get the help that they may need. If you find that this person is an active suicidal kind of crisis, you want to make sure that you limit the potential access to any lethal means. Because when persons are in a suicidal crisis, they're more likely to be reactive, meaning anything that is possibly near their hands, they reach out to. So if we can get rid of any type of pills or razors or anything that could be considered lethal means, do so, especially if you know someone that may have a mental illness or a tendency to have depressive thoughts or suicidal thoughts. It's also important not to leave someone who's actively suicidal. I know some of the tendencies may be this person, so I can't deal with this, and you literally just move away and forget that this person may have said anything. But even in your midst of, if you decide to stay and help that individual, to be empathetic and be willing to listen to them and not be judged. But sometimes we have our beliefs about suicidal behavior that we tend to put on people. But at the end of the day, those persons that are in that state have already judged themselves so harshly. So you want to approach it in a more empathetic and non-judgmental manner. You want to also offer hope as an alternative to other available kind of resources or things that they're thinking about doing, such as ending their life. And at the end, seek professional help. Because we all know that, you may not be prepared or you may not be trained, but we all have a role to play in suicide prevention. So making sure that you seek that help or encourage that person to seek the help is also very, very important, and it plays a significant role towards prevention of suicide. But as we were talking about in dealing with all of these aspects, whether it's in depression or grief or just someone experiencing suicidal thoughts, remember not to bottle up your feelings. Troy had mentioned earlier about these are emotions that you will typically experience. In this current situation, there's a lot of range of emotions that people will experience. Depression, grief, sadness, anxiety, all of these feelings are normal reactions to what you will be, what we find ourselves in. Not to bottle it up. To be able to give yourself permission to feel those feelings, because we are human beings and we react to what life gives us. And it's okay to be sad some days. It's okay to be anxious some days, because that's who you are, a human being feeling these feelings. But remember that these feelings, if you feel them, don't stay in them too long. So feel them, but don't allow yourself to be consumed by them every day, all day. During this time, you don't want to make any major life decisions like moving to another country to get away from COVID-19. So make sure that you don't make any major life decisions, breaking up with significant others, deciding major aspects of your life. This is not really a good time because you may be in all of your feelings. Important also is to establish a plan. Right now, we have this large amount of uncertainty, and that's something that we can't control. But there are things that we can control, and one of those things we can control is planning our day. It may mean getting up at a reasonable hour instead of staying in bed and Netflixing all day in your pajamas, but coming up with a plan so that you feel productive. I know what I do typically is I have to-do list, and instead of overwhelming myself, I give myself 2 days to get the to-do list done. But I set a plan and I establish some level of routine. Troy was talking about not being able to exercise. Well, I do exercise because I need my exercise. And I literally walk around the yard. It's boring, but I do it. And sometimes I find myself also getting some yoga in because it's also relaxing for me, especially in the anxiety provoking times that we find ourselves in. But establish a plan that works for you. Some things that are definitely beyond our control, and recognizing that, because the government can't say, hey, it's going to happen next week, it's going to happen that day. So we just have to accept that there are some things that are beyond our control. I'm not quite sure if people will have issues with it, considering that the bars have been closed for a very, very long time, and their stocks may be gone by now, but definitely eliminate or reduce any alcohol or drug use. I know a lot of people will say, well, it calms me, it helps me to get through life, but these particular coping mechanisms are not healthy. So definitely decrease your substance use, whether alcohol or drugs. I mentioned exercise. I don't mean doing a serious cardio extreme for, 60 minutes. I'm doing any kind of activity that may mean. It may also mean to whatever, cleaning the house is a physical activity. So don't feel like you have to be stuck in having just to do push-ups and sit-ups, because some people just don't like exercise. I feel you. It can be torturous at times, but find something that is enjoyable for you and a physical activity. Troy, you wanted to say something? You're mute. You mute yourself.
Yeah, sorry about that. What I wanted to add to what you were saying basically was that you have persons, we are so used to our life being on a schedule for us. We go to work and we're told what we have to do in a given day. And then we know we have to pick up the kids from school, and then we have to fix dinner. What COVID-19 has done for us is that has taken all of that away from us. So now it is in our laps that we have to actually make it intentional to actually deliberately design a schedule for our life. If we do not do that, we're gonna spiral into, and I wouldn't want to say into the abyss, but you're gonna have to create a schedule yourself and be intentional about keeping that schedule. And it don't have to be the same schedule every day, so that you can have flavor to your routine.
I agree. As human beings, we like to be predictable. We like predictability. We like to know what's going to happen. And by setting a level of control in your life, it helps to kind of manage the anxiety that the situation has put us in. I'm glad that I'm not the only one that finds exercising through cleaning house. So thank you for sharing that. We're in this together. The other aspect is setting healthy boundaries. Very, very important. We are amongst our family and friends, and boundaries are very, very important. Especially when you are the only one wanting to clean the bathroom, or being basically the task driver to clean the bathroom every time. That's my least favorite room to clean. So, you got to set some boundaries. If you need your alone time, tell them, hey, I need my alone time. And alone time might just be, sitting on your porch or sitting on the patio, or just going in your room, or finding a space. But setting healthy boundaries with the people in your home, as well as yourself, because Sometimes we want to overwork ourselves to deal with our emotions. So make sure that when you are doing your to-do list or your routine, that you are setting healthy boundaries and recognizing that you don't spend all 9 hours of a day just doing some project. Make sure that you set some time in there to be healthy, whether it's eating proper food or getting some physical activity in the midst of your day. Another aspect, positive outlook. Glass is half full. We can always complain about everything underneath the sun, but we can always be thankful for everything underneath the sun. So it's a choice to be positive in how we look about life. And if we are trying to get through this situation and deal with whether our emotions of depression or grief, is recognizing that this too shall pass. I've been seeing that phrase over and over and over again. This too shall pass. There was a quote that I was reading by Maya Angelou talking about every storm eventually runs out of rain. I don't think I actually quoted it correctly, but it's along those lines, that the situation is going to end eventually. We don't know when, but it will end. And having that positive thought in your mind will also lead to a decrease in your emotions, hopefully. Relaxation strategies. Allow yourself to regroup and recharge. Relaxation will mean different things for different people. I thoroughly enjoy having a place just to be able to read or just to be able to kind of de-stress a little bit, whether relaxation techniques of deep breathing or yoga or different aspects. So find what you do to relax and do some of those things. Make sure that it's not drugs or alcohol, because remember, you're trying to stay healthy. Laugh and vent. Laugh and vent. Two very important things during this time. Yes, we are in this serious crisis, this serious pandemic, but we can also find time to laugh and vent. It is good for our health mentally. So, come up with some jokes or watch some funny shows, and call your friend that you trust. Be able to kind of say, hey, I'm having a really bad day. Or, hey, let's just catch up. I haven't talked to you in like 2 years. Now we're in COVID-19. Let's catch up in the 2-year span. We haven't talked. Stay socially connected. Even though we have to socially distance, that doesn't mean that we can't be socially connected. Look at us. We're on a Saturday on lockdown, socially connecting via Zoom, right? So it's a possibility to stay socially connected during this time. Coping, problem solving, and conflict resolution. I put that all in one little basket because it kind of goes in all in one little basket. When you are in a room, a house, a space with the same people day in, day out, 24/7, you're going to have some issues, okay? Let's be honest. It's fine. But getting to dealing with those problems, coping with those problems, and resolving those problems is a whole different matter. It means that you have to rely on your healthy skills in these particular areas as you navigate and as we experience this COVID-19 situation. Your cultural and spiritual beliefs, extremely important. People find strength from it. Effective clinical care, mental, physical, substance use disorders. Make sure that even in this time that you take care of yourself physically as well as mentally. There are things, I know that they have an AA meetings online, Troy does stuff. There are options at home to be able to manage your mental health. And there are numbers as well as your GP numbers that you can reach out to if there's emergencies. Please be alert for risk issues. We talked about depression symptoms. We talked about some of the grief symptoms. We talked about sometimes, the suicidal thoughts. Be aware not only for yourself, but be aware about others. Because some people are like, oh, this ain't gonna happen to me because we got this thing called stigma, that we refuse to acknowledge that our emotions are unhealthy or how we're thinking are unhealthy. And sometimes we just kind of ignore it or avoid it. Please be aware of where you are emotionally, mentally, as well as those around you. Be informed. I'm glad that you're joining us because that means that you're, trying to be more informed, and this is good. Be supportive. Also know when to refer for help and encourage other people to get help as well, which leads to our local resource numbers. Feel free to, I don't know, take a photo of it, write it down. We will leave it up as we talk about, open the discussion. Is there anybody who wants to share or has questions? This is always the part where no one wants to, just one person. It usually just starts with one person. Just one. Anyone?
So let me ask a question there. Is there anyone experiencing or have experienced a loss during this time since March? And if you have experienced it, how did you deal with your grief and in this situation versus when you would have experienced some form of loss in another situation? Maybe it could be loss of a loved one, loss of job, or financial income. Share with us.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alexandrina. I'm from Antigua. I have not experienced a personal loss, but being a counselor and manning a hotline, I, I have to respond to calls, and I have to enable people to manage and cope with their loss. I have friends who have lost relatives, both in the Caribbean and in other parts of the world. So they have been reaching out to me. Okay. Now, as providers, sometimes balancing the care that you give to others and the care that you should be giving yourself can be a bit tricky, especially at this time when the demands are so great. So as I was sharing with some of my friends in the Caribbean this morning, I find myself moving along the continuum, sometimes from calm to concerned. And so I am hoping that I wouldn't go further than concerned at this point in time. There's lots of talk of post-COVID. We're still in COVID, so no one knows what post-COVID would look like. So that's my situation at this point in time. And we also have a system where, based on our emotions, we could send a heart of a particular color in our group, and they will know what is our status, and they can reach out to see how we are coping as providers as well. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. Anyone else? Questions or statement on how you handling, whether have you run into anyone who might have had suicidal ideation, or anybody who might have feel depressed or suffering from grief?
Hi, I'd like to say something. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, recently I would have had an aunt who was buried, I think, just last weekend.
Okay.
And the most hurtful thing about it is we could not even attend the funeral. And my heart goes out to her children because she's an aunt, one of those people who had like 15 children. And I don't know to this day how they managed that funeral with all of the children and the grands and stuff like that. What do you say to people like that? Because they're going to be grieving for a very long time. Accepting that the fact that they could not even attend their mother or their grandmother's funeral. What do you say to people like that?
Well, sometimes I know persons, and when you go through situations like that, you can actually have feelings, what we call feelings of guilt, and having feelings of guilt, meaning that you weren't able to be there to see them off when they would have expired or when they would have passed away, or even share your condolences. And so what I would share with them, to help them to understand that, death is a normal process. But even though it's a normal process, it's okay to feel, depressed for that short period of time. Is also to feel, even if you feel angry that the authorities didn't allow you to actually share in the bereavement as a group. It's okay to, just to sit down with them and let them, even if you can't, what you call, in their space, but allow them to actually vent and bring some kind of closure, because a lot of times in grief, we find out that it's very difficult to bring closure in this kind of environment, and especially when there's sudden pass away and you're not able to say goodbye to that loved one, and especially with this highly contagious virus which is going on, and then you have to practice social distances. Then it's just a way, giving them opportunity to share how they feel, on that, let them know that, they don't have to be isolated from you, but, just to share love and just to check up on them and have that family connectivity with them.
I want to chime in. Yes, in this situation, we cannot grieve in the way that we are used to grieving, by having funerals and having a going away ceremony. But one thing that I think that might be helpful is creating a new way of sending off.
Yes.
It may mean for them to write a letter. It might mean that they do something symbolic within the home to help bring the family together. They can do stuff like this, do like a family kind of group meeting where persons are able to remember the person that they lost, so that even though they have to physically distance themselves, they can engage in social support of each other by utilizing electronic means, and maybe even work on planning something as an event, to keep themselves in a positive way of looking at it as something that they can do post COVID-19. Maybe some things to be a kind of like a helping coping mechanism as they deal with the loss. But as Troy was saying, the emotions are going to be there, and that they're going to go through the different stages of those emotions. And the relying on the family is going to be very important, and loved ones. And so as a person who knows them and is part of this, to maybe check in on them. I recently have a colleague, and I have some friends that have lost persons in their life. And what I sometimes will do is I will send them, messages thinking of you, I'm here if you need to talk. Not like every day, but every couple of days, just to let them know that I am here, and so forth. And sometimes I'll even send, sending you lots of, prayers, hugs, whatever, so that they know that I am still, supportive, even though in the COVID-19 situation. So you can try some of those things. I will also say that, pay attention to see if those particular emotions become more significant and they need help. That, there are the local numbers that we have here. So maybe you can share that with them. So they'll have those local numbers if they find themselves in emotions that they can't handle and they need professional help to deal with those emotions. Thank you so much for sharing.
I saw some of you wrote where you watch a memorial online with somebody who would have passed away. And like I know I shared the other day, just actually 2 days ago, I shared with my wife. I said to her, my life insurance is paid up to date. If I should die today, please don't spend. I always talk about my dad. Please do not spend more than $2,000 to $3,000. on my burial. Just burn me, cremate me, and you can make an urn with my picture. Just sit up in the living room. I said I want it in a humorous way, but the thing is, you could always have a memorial after we'd and gone on from COVID, like our friend in Antigua, Alexandria, we don't know what's going to happen after COVID-19 or what normalcy or what normal will be like for us. So the whole thing is, I said, okay, then, prep the family, prep the individual. And you could always have, for me, I said, if I die today, you could bury me tomorrow, and then plan a memorial afterwards, with my big picture. And if you want to have the urn there, you could have the urn there. So that
You have this all planned out, I see.
Yeah.
Any more comments, questions?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I see a gentleman in the...
Oh, go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, well, I'm listening to the presentation is very, I think for this forum is very timely. I know that I was said last week, I would have mentioned that, perhaps the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, which I am a part of, can partner, with persons such as yourselves, who I will be making every effort to contact once this COVID situation is actually bringing us back to normalcy. My question is, though, I know every couple of days, the Minister of Health or the Prime Minister would give a national update on the COVID-19 situation. I may have missed it, but just for my own edification, has any thought been given maybe during one of the Ministry of Health session to have professionals such as yourselves speak to the nation for maybe 25, 30, or 40 minutes, particularly for those thousands of persons now who are affected with this COVID situations. Many persons that you probably do like I do, listen to the talk shows, and you have a lot of concerns coming into the talk shows from national insurance for any number of reasons or issues affecting them. And I'm trying to figure out what kind of professional help is being offered to the thousands of persons now who are affected, and many, I believe, for many months, may not even have a secure job to return to.
So I agree that we really need to start focusing a lot more on mental health issues. I know that the country has made some headway in trying to address those issues. They have put out public service announcements. I know that different media outlets have had different professionals on talking about how to cope with the COVID-19 situation. On the slide, we shared the hotline that the Ministry of Health has. It's the MHPSS helpline, the mental health psychosocial support helpline that they have established for persons dealing with mental health issues. But I will say that our Sandlands is also offering telepsychology. I think there is the community counseling and assessment number, which is the outpatient for Sandlands rehabilitation, and then the psychology department's number, which is at the bottom of the slide, the 364-9672. I will say that I feel that more information needs to be out there about mental health. More discussion needs to be out there about mental health. So this was kind of one of the, I guess, motivating factors for us to do this series, to really kind of allow persons an avenue to not only be aware or educated, but also to be able to get some information from professionals. And I appreciate you sharing that. And we look forward to being able to assist as best as we can. And thank you again for joining us this Saturday. But I'm in agreement. You kind of preaching to the converted. I believe mental health is definitely important, and we're not spending enough resources, whether time, money, or other resources to address the mental health issues in this country. COVID-19 has only added to our issues. It's not like mental health just arrived when COVID-19 came. We've had mental health issues for a while, and we've seen an increase in the demand of those particular areas. But it is something that, with the stigma that's centered around it, most persons will see mental health at the bottom of the totem pole and not pay the appropriate attention. So appreciate your thoughts and allowing me to be on my soapbox and talk about that.
And then also what we have found out is that a lot of times people confuse mental illness with mental health. And what we trying to do is give an awareness of mental health, which mental illness is a part of. Just like any physical health, mental health is very important. And if you don't have your mental health intact, you could have an enormous set of problems in your community. And like Dr. King stated, a lot of thought has not gone into the mental health of our people and what is happening in COVID-19. Case in point, you have the homeless. That's a population that was not really addressed as it relates to mental health. And then you have other demographic of individuals in our community that we did not consider the mental health issues of those individuals. And then I know Dr. King mentioned about being home with your family and so forth like that. That brings up a whole gamut of mental health issues. And when we talk about mental health issues, you have, your emotional state. You have persons who, engage in some substance. You heard on the news locally the other day that this guy was put before the courts because he had his bar open, and people want to find some form of panacea or some form of antidote to help them get through this session, or even help them get through this weekend of lockdown, or going through what we call a new normal. And so your mental health is very important aspect for you to excel on your job, for you to excel in your personal life, and for you to be a socially acceptable individual in our community. Any more?
Thank you. Anyone else? I saw.
Yeah, this is me again.
Hi.
As you were talking, both of you were speaking about the mental health issues. The thing about us as a people, once we hear mental health and we hear SRC, people, it's a serious, stigma. I think maybe what we can do moving forward is perhaps appeal to the talk show hosts throughout the nation and see if they can have as a focus mental health, but don't call it mental health, call it something else. We have to be strategic. So people
we gotta call it mental health.
Huh?
The thing is, we gotta call it mental health. I hear people say we gotta change the name, we gotta change the name, we gotta change the name. No, we don't have to change the name. We have to change our thoughts about the name.
Keep it real.
We gotta keep it real. Because at the end of the day, we call different things different names, but it still keeps in our mind the same image. And so I'm not a fan of changing name. I'm a fan of addressing what are the thoughts that we have about mental health. Why do we avoid recognizing that we may be sad? What's wrong if I have depression? And why shouldn't I go get help? Because if I break my arm, the first thing I'm going to do is go to the doctor because my arm is broken. So if I am mentally broken, then why do I hesitate, or why do I feel like I have to treat someone different, or be prejudiced against them or discriminate against them because they are struggling mentally? So I hear you. I would like to say if the researchers out there, but in essence, we have to change how we think about it. And a part of the thoughts about mental health and mental illness is centered around this negative aspect. And so you'll see constantly this comparison of mental health and physical health. Because what they're trying to do is to change the person's thought about mental health and put it in the same frame as physical health. Because we have no problem sitting down with a stranger and talking about their sugar. I'll be waiting on a bus or something, and person say, "Man, my sugar high today, or my pressure high," and we have a similar conversation. But then I say to this person, "Man, I have depression or anxiety or I schizophrenia," they try to move away. And so we try to address the cognitive aspect or how we think about it by putting it in the same vein as physical health.
Yes.
So I hear you, but it's like sugarcoating instead of hitting it head on, which is the thought behind the mental health. But whatever we can do, I'm all on board of whatever we can do to move this wheel forward. So if they want to call it, I don't know what word we could use, emotional health. We could use emotional health. Let's talk about emotional health.
Emotional, behavioral, all that is a part of your mental health.
Yes, yes. But you know, my point is, hopefully though, I think we need to just target the airwaves and just get the message out there. Just educate us, man. You know, just get persons on the talk shows to perhaps highlight that if only 15, 20 minutes, so people can constantly hear it. And hopefully acceptance will be, you know, will come into play.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, thank you for sharing that. We do have some persons who are talking about it on the airways. So yeah, the media does help. So, you know, we just maybe have to be a little more vocal and asking, but they do definitely help. I see a question. You want me to go into mental health psychosocial support?
That I think Wong has a question.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, I'm listening to the discussion intently. As professionals, we have to learn to call it by its name. That is what it is. We need to stop sugarcoating, because the more we sugarcoat, I believe, is the more we adding to the stigma that is already attached to mental health.
Right.
We have to own it, and we have to assist persons to own it as well. Call it by its name. In another component of health is a similar situation with sexual and reproductive health. Some professionals are not comfortable by calling certain terms adequately. So as providers, we have to teach people to be comfortable with themselves and to be comfortable by calling it what it is. That is what it is. And then we get the acceptance, and then we move along. We may want to say, oh, psychosocial. And then when people come to the forum and we start talking about mental health issues, they may feel that we have been dishonest with them, that we tricked them into coming there. So please, let us call it what it is. We already know there's the stigma that is attached. So our work is to help people to understand and to help to lessen the stigma or the impact of that stigma. Thank you.
I agree. Is there anyone else? We heading into an hour and a half now. Anyone else want to share before we wrap up? Hi, go ahead. I see your hand is raised.
Dr.
David?
King, this is Vanya from Dominica.
Hi.
I'm so glad that I was able to get in, because even when I had some issues with internet service earlier, I think I had an issue with my mental health, because I was like, so, you know, not able to get into that program, and I really did not want to miss out, you know. And so sometimes anxiety and other things can, you know, trigger a lot. And I'm like, hey, almost 20 minutes into the program and I'm having internet issues. I'm going in and out. 30 minutes, I'm getting some, you know, flashes, coming in, going out, losing contact. And so even these things, you know, when you find yourself in it, these two can trigger a lot for you.
Yes. Like for me, finding a place to do this, because my internet is actually down. So I completely understand. I was like, I have to do this. I have to be there. And I'm like, trying, do I have enough data on my phone to go? So yes, it can be very stressful just to be able in navigating and coping. Internet is life now. And that when we don't have that lifeline, it can be even more traumatic. So, but I am grateful and thankful that you were able to join us today. So thank you so much. I'm going to hope that next Saturday the internet will work and we will hear from you again.
Thank you very much, my good friend from Dominica, and thank you for inviting your friend from Antigua. And so let's spread it around the Caribbean. You know, it's so good to have our Caribbean brothers and sisters on the call, and we got to get the word out. You know, if all of us just continue to talk about mental health and COVID-19, I think together we can handle going through what we're going through until the end of this season, because we don't know when it will end, but we know it will end because everything is just for a season.
So we are coming to the end of this session, but we invite you for next week, Saturday, same time, same place.
Same meeting ID and password. It will not change for the next couple of weeks. So we locked it in for the next couple of weeks.
Troy. Thanks very much.
Good.
And next week, we're going to be talking about anxiety. Yay.
Yes.
So we're going to be really talking and trying to come up with coping mechanisms, because I'm quite sure this is emotion that we are all feeling at this point in time. So join us next week, Saturday, May 2nd at 1 p.m., utilizing the information that you signed in today. Take care, everyone. And thank you again. Troy, do you have anything else before we sign off?
Well, I will just want to say thank you, and we're looking forward to the next 3 sessions. And hopefully when we finish this, we have a brand new segment. You know, we're going to pull Dr. King inside our next segment. And I just want to give you a little tidbit, because the next series will be how to escape your prison. So that will be very interesting, yes. And it all deals with mental health, how to escape your prison. But next week, I'm looking forward to anxiety. And thank you very much for participating.
See you all next week.
Yes.
You're so welcome. Please send me the recording of today's message, because I miss out on quite a bit from the very beginning.
Okay. No problem. Just send us the email. Just email us and we will send it in, okay?
Thanks, Troy.
No problem. You're welcome.
Thank you. Great session.
Bye.
Okay, you have a good weekend.
Bye, Troy.
Bye-bye.
Bye, all the best.
Thank you.
Thanks again.